Welcome to Roots and Ruminants, your podcast for creative and innovative use of farm, pasture, and rangeland. We're going back to the basics of raising and grazing livestock, growing your own forage, and practical land use.
And we are off. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Roots and Ruminants. I'm Justin Frichty alongside Jared Knock.
Hello.
Jared, how was your spring?
Spring is good. It's another spring. Spring always kind of gets sprung at you. So it's been a bit hectic.
Does it only happen after Easter?
I don't know. It seems like it is a little bit. And this is a weird spring because a lot of things are happening at once because it's kind of early, but it's not really that early. You know what I mean? Like the snow's all gone. I wouldn't call it an early spring though. I would say that the weather has been nicer and it's been drier and it feels earlier than it is. But when you look at the trees, the rye, like all that kind of stuff, that should be like almost farther along right now than it is in my mind.
I agree. Because we didn't have snow, it seemed like we started spring early in March.
Mm-hmm.
However, things are just kind of the same stage of growth that they've been in for a few weeks. So just a little cool, just kind of hanging out.
Yeah. But
okay, so the planting progress is, I hear this on like the Linder Farm Network every morning, where they'll call in people from around the Midwest and say they'll get on and they'll say, "Yep, I'm in the corn planter. Field conditions are great, but we need a little rain, and I'm in Redwood Falls, Minnesota." What's the field conditions like in eastern South Dakota?
So the planting conditions from a moisture standpoint are probably about as good as you could possibly get it. You're pretty much going to drive through everything. You're pretty much going to plant into moisture everywhere, albeit very little. And then, the biggest thing is like, it's just not that warm, right?
Yeah.
So it's debatable. I don't think people are wrong to plant like a corn crop right now, but I don't think that they're right either, like to get it in and slam it in. It's 44 degrees right now, and it's slowly raining, a cold rain that's, close to sleet, and it's like, that's not great, but it's not awful either. So, again, if it was a week from now and temperatures are a little bit higher, I think it'd be a whole different story. But
yeah,
it has been a good wide window for small grain. Now, unfortunately, wheat isn't worth anything, so there's no point in planting it really. But all the forages, the oats, alfalfa, even some of the grass seeding stuff that we're doing, we got a great window for that.
I think our strong short-term memories kick in, and we go, holy buckets, I had such a short planting window last year, and then it started raining. And you kind of look at the forecast, and it almost looks like that. So guys are like, I've got to get a lot of stuff hammered in right now before it starts raining and doesn't shut off, because it can happen, because it did last year.
How many guys, there's so many people I've talked to this spring that were like on that line about whether they should be planting or not. They're like, well, we did plant the 24th of April last year. And then we got out of the field for 3 weeks. And then it was the 15th of May before we got planting again. And then they were like, the corn that I planted on the 24th of April and the corn that I planted on the 13th of May emerged within 2 days of each other.
Right.
So, like, you got it done, but it isn't really growing. And not that we're here to talk about corn planting, but it is like the barometer, right? So, corn's the most cold tolerant warm season species, right? So if it's too cold to plant corn, it is way too cold to plant sorghum, Sudan grass, millet, anything like that, right? So like it's the most cold tolerant of the warm seasons. So it's kind of that when the corn can go and the corn can work, it opens up the next class of seedings from cool season to warm season. But I was surprised. I think so what's the date today? 24th? Yes,
24th of April. Yep.
I would say my oats emerged 5 days ago that I planted on the 30th of March.
Boy, I think we might have done that the same. We got a snow, like 6 inches of snow. Yeah, we did some right before that.
Yep.
And it was just a few days ago you could drive by and start to see it. And
so like that's just really indicative of what the soil temperatures were. That's why everybody's like, oh, the grass isn't coming. It's like in our area, no, we had a 3-inch, 2.5-inch rain early. The grass is going to be fine. The hay is going to be fine. It is just too cold for it to really express itself too well. If it takes over 3 weeks for your oats to emerge, the soil's pretty cold. Right?
Yeah, no, I would agree. Yep.
So I would say like a deceivingly to wrap up like the spring conditions, it's deceivingly nice out because it feels like it's really nice out, but the soils are just not that warm yet.
Yep.
But it started so early that it feels like it's the 10th of May, but it is not. Hence the frost on the windows half the mornings in the last 10
Yeah,
days.
we still had that this week, right?
Yeah.
What do you see? Obviously, like the shining star in the ag world right now is beef cattle prices, feeder
Yeah.
cattle, live cattle. It's like it's awesome. So, how are you seeing that turn into more forage plantings? Are guys
You
just
know, a
excited to
little
make feed, or
a
yeah?
little bit, but it's kind of an inventory issue, right? So most people don't need as much of it because they're low on inventory because prices have been good and they don't really want to buy in. So we're gonna play a game of chicken here and be like, okay,
Hmm.
who's willing to buy something that might be moderately underpriced compared to the other classes to build inventory, and it doesn't exist in feeder cattle, right? Usually there's like, oh, well, if you got those lightweight heifers are a pretty good buy. There's no buys, right? There's no buys in anything that's a feeder market because the market's way too hungry for anything they can get their hand on. There's no buys in short-term cows or broken mouth cows, right? Or, late calving bred heifers, right? So like there's usually some gaps somewhere where it'd be like, oh, I can buy these and I actually can make it pencil and work pretty good, even if prices go down. Everything's kind of baked in. So then you're back to like, okay, your best solution then is if you're going to expand is keep a bunch of heifers or buy some heifers, because they're the cheapest, way cheaper than a bred heifer, but then go through the whole cycle. But you got to trust the cycle is going to last.
Well, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're bullish that we're good for another 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
then you did keep more heifers and you do need more grazing acres.
Yeah.
And there are people that have done that. And we've seen that a little bit with more annual grazing systems. So like we do this OptiGraze blend,
Yeah.
which is our stock mix of forage oats with a base of Italian ryegrass and some hybrid brassicas that regrow. And like if you go look back on the historical usage of OptiGraze, like the last big year of it was 2013-ish,
Yeah.
2014-ish, when the cattle
Yeah.
cycle started, when it was really good. And we're back to that again, and our use of OptiGraze is way up
Is it?
over the last
Okay.
couple of years. Yeah. So people are doing that,
Yeah.
they have more heifers retained or more cows on inventory that they need more grazing acres for. So they punch that in early April with hopes of starting to graze that in June and then rotate through that and graze it through an entire season. And honestly, like the best play with that, and we've done quite a few custom mixes to
Mm-hmm.
cater this need, are the guys that have yearlings and maybe not enough grass for it, and they'll run yearlings on it. And if you run the math to pencil your value per gain per acre off of those acres, that's a pretty good little, that's a good little
Yeah.
scenario to run.
Yeah. Well, also, like you said, it's a way to manage into the cattle cycle. So if you're not ready to, don't have access to, don't have permission, don't want to plant something back to, permanent pasture, semi-permanent pasture, make a 5-year commitment. You can just flex into a year and be like, okay, I'm short on grass, but this is going to get me through, so I don't have to destock or I can do what I want to. But yeah, that'd be great. That'd be really cool to overlay the OptiGraze usage with the
Yeah.
cattle cycle and see if it's
Yeah.
either a predictor, or it's either a predictor or it's a result of where we're at in the cattle cycle.
It's a result of it. It
Yeah,
just follows the trend. Yeah.
yeah. So then its usage isn't predicting a peak in the cattle cycle. It's just following along with the
Hmm.
at least some effort towards trying to keep more cattle.
Yeah. Sorry, customers, you're not that smart. You're not prepared to plant. If you would have done it last year to have
Yeah,
more heifers retained
right,
or more cows on
right.
inventory, and you
But
would
that's
have
what I mean. I
cashed
don't
in
want
with
to.
feeders this year.
Yeah, because everything. Yeah, going into 2013, it's like okay, this is going to build into the spike. That's not the case. Well, and the reality is that we've just have lost so much more grass since 2013. It's insane. I mean,
Yeah.
I like people think that we're done tearing up grass. Like we're not. I've got a piece 2 miles east of me that I should take pictures of that they're going to tear out 20 acres probably of very mature, thick, dense stand of trees. It's right in the middle of a field and a pasture, and they're just pulling up boulders out of this pasture, right?
Oh,
It's like pushing them off towards the sloughs that are in the middle of this field, all to like just try to get another 82 acres of farm ground that doesn't work on its face, which is their
Who is
operation
it?
level
Call them
decision.
out, Jared. Who is it? Say their name.
They are a part of a German
This will
speaking
shame them
religious
enough.
community that is prominent in the Dakotas and Montana. That's all I'll say.
Well, good. They're not listening to
Anyway, not all of them are the same. It just that's the neighbor that's doing it. So, but yeah, so they don't have cows, so there's what they're going to do. It's one track way. But we are 2 years away from this type of calf prices and this type of soybean prices, from there being equal cash rent value on pasture ground versus cropland, barring massive subsidies that are probably going to just skew it from the administration because of the tariff wars. But other than that, it would be
This
a
is
point where the established grass would actually be more valuable per acre per year than the marginal cropland.
Jared said in 2 years, cash rent will be the same on pasture as it is in cropland.
If the prices maintain, yeah, yeah.
I
On
was actually,
marginal
yeah,
cropland, my area, marginal cropland, good pasture, yeah.
yep.
But I don't think those have ever. Like I'd have to ask my grandpa or somebody, my neighbor who's 91, to see if there was ever even a point in time in the '80s farm crisis, or somewhere where those two things inverted. You know what I mean? Where the I don't think it would have ever done that because cattle prices were never that strong during any of the other commodity crashes.
Yeah. Yeah, when they crashed, everything kind of
Yeah.
crashed, it seemed
And in
like.
1516 it didn't last long enough. But it was close. So it would have got like to $100 an acre on pasture on the top end, 110, and then probably 150 on the below average farm ground. So it's got a bit of a gap to cover. Without subsidies, it would already be that way around me. To be honest with you, without corn soybean subsidies, it would already be an equal value proposition.
Do you see that for land values selling too? Or is that too much of a long-term risk to,
There was a quarter. There was a quarter here, a full tillable quarter, but a lot of saline that sold in between two large pasture sales. So normally the crop round's been selling for 6 to 10,000, 10 plus over east, and the pasture ground has jumped a lot in a year to about four to 4,500. And so there is a spot where there is a full tillable quarter that sold in and amongst on a different sale, in and amongst some pasture with full perpetual easements on it already, right? So just pasture forever. The pasture sold for 44 to 4,500. This piece of farm ground, there was three pieces of different value. The lowest value, full tillable quarter, brought 4,100. So there's already, and these are a couple miles apart, these pastures in this field. So there's already
yeah.
at least a situation where a really junky piece of farm ground is selling for less than a pasture with a perpetual grassland easement on it.
And there's enough people that want to raise cows to make this happen?
I'm very fortunate to live in a high density cattle culture area.
Yeah, you
That's
are. Yeah.
but we've worked on that too. Like I start thinking about like I mean I'm not in no way am I trying to are we taking credit, but like think about how much work we've done with customers in this area over the last 15 years, Justin, to
Yeah,
help
true.
people find ways to do it. It's always been a struggle, hard, but there's a lot of folks around here that are committed to it, and we've been committed to provide tools and programs and incentives, seed mixes, and innovation to right along with it, right? So definitely a cattle culture around here, but we've had to work on it too.
Yeah, and it's not even just those things that you mentioned with incentives and seeds and mixes. It's like the veterinarians that
Yeah,
have been set up
yeah,
with
exactly.
your brother and like that whole system and the feed crew and like it all has to come together. I often think about that even in our community in Pipestone. Like, um, when people are recognized for success or you see people succeed, like it's no accident that that happens
Hmm.
by chance. Like you have to have really good suppliers and
Yeah.
a great support system for your inputs to be able to do that too.
Hmm.
And I don't know. I don't know. I think of that in our area especially. It's very well known for its sheep producers.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's because, originally this Pipestone vet system was there. And then this Pipestone lamb and wool program grew. And
mhm,
like all of that started to build the network of producers that were able to tie into those resources and get help and be successful. So
yeah. I mean,
this is kind of the same situation.
there's no other reason for there to be that density of large progressive sheep producers in the Pipestone area. It's an anomaly. I mean, that could just as easily be in, you know, central Minnesota or
Yeah.
eastern South
Yeah.
Dakota, whatever. But it is a complete anomaly that for some reason there's this huge pocket of
Hmm.
professional sheep producers.
Yeah. Yeah. And it goes back to the influencers that created that network.
Yeah, yeah.
It's kind of fun to think about.
It is fun to think about. Well, and then Pipestone has always had a strong youth development program. I think that's part of it too, right? So,
Sure.
livestock judging, meats judging, right? Like it's
Oh
always been
man.
extremely important to the community
Yeah.
and the culture there, which gets people driven into it.
Uh-huh.
It helps in our like small
It
community too.
No, it
When
starts to build this foundation
yeah,
of future agricultural producers is what it
yeah,
does. And then that's tooting the horn for 4-H and FFA and the people that help with that because it truly does at least continue them down the path to stay involved in ag, get a
hmm,
degree in ag, and then man, if you can get them back in your community,
yeah, yeah.
keeps it strong.
Well, I think that's it helps that community support too. I mean, I think back to our oldest daughter is getting more and more involved in livestock. She's doing really good. In fact, she's 12 and I can send her on a ranger and she can pretty much check cows for me. She doesn't get out, obviously tag anything or doesn't put herself in harm's way, but she can take care of so much stuff now. I can give her like 3 or 4 hours with stuff to do that she can do if I'm in the field or if I'm on Zoom calls, if I'm work or whatever it is. So over Easter break, she had a lot of stuff that she was working on. And I think back to like years ago, like when she was in first grade, she came back home and she's just made a comment of like, Dad, you wouldn't believe it. There's only like, she was like 20 kids in her class, right? There's only like 4 kids in my class that have sheep. Everybody else just has cows. And like that, you pick up on those things really early on as like what your culture is and what's cool, what's important, what's meaningful. And so that's a much different scenario than coming home and be like, I feel like an outsider because I'm the only person that has livestock, right?
Mm,
Or, and that's a astute observation of a 6-year-old, but that's true for people of any ages. Because if you're the only person within your area that has cows, and every time that there's cows that are out, it's always yours, and everybody talks. It's totally different than it being commonplace at 9 o'clock in the morning to drive through our area and there's a cow out, and then it's just a race like whose is it? Who gets to do it? Where somebody else might even put them in for you after they're out because they'd appreciate that next time if I'm there, just take care of it so I can keep going. So it's much easier to raise livestock in an area where people are value and also have livestock. It really is. It helps.
sure.
But you can
Yep.
build that, right? Like one operation, one person, one influencer, you can build that wherever
Yeah.
you're at over time, but it's going to take a long time.
You remember when we did that podcast with Clay Conroy?
Mm-hmm.
Clay with the Working Cows podcast.
Yeah.
And I think he was asking us this question, but maybe we just didn't get to this point. He was talking about, well, he kept asking, well, how do you get crop farmers to be able to help young people that want to raise livestock? And he
Yeah.
kind of kept pounding that message and we kind of threw out some real life scenarios and stuff. But ultimately, if you don't build this foundation of the culture that wants to do it,
Yeah.
it never actually happens.
No. No. It's like those aren't going to be solved by like the large ranches working with the large farmers in a scalable way. It's going to be one piece, one field, one smaller operation at a time for the most part, right? Not saying that there isn't some of those big exchanges, but for the most part, it's going to be a young person that grows up or a person that decides to reinvent themselves later in life and say, hey, I want to try this and take this on and build it out myself. Because that is the thing. I mean, you see that, talk about that building culture. That's why those like youth livestock things are important, right? Is to build that culture and to find people that get some experience with it and say, okay, we haven't had a cow in this place in 30 years, 40 years. everybody else gave up on them, was sick of them. But we still have a place to start with 15 head, that without changing land use, because we're just not using this piece or that piece, and we've got an old barn here or whatever. Just kind of to build from the ashes in a small way, because you should start small. Well,
Yeah.
completely underestimate
Learn
what
into
it
it.
takes to. And if you ever follow on social media some of the homesteader groups and stuff, and they buy 10 U's and okay, this is all the stuff I'm happening with my 10 U's, and it's like, okay, you can forget how overwhelming this thing would be to have your first 10 cows or your first 20 head of ewes if you've never had it before.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, anyway.
It reminds me. So yesterday I had a great conversation with a good friend of mine who lives in Brookings, and he understands agriculture, but definitely didn't grow up in it and not tied to it. And we were talking about, the difference between ranchers and farmers,
Yeah.
and how farmers have been able to scale to a point that has allowed corporations and outside investors to come in and buy farmland, but also still farm, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and we talked about the difference between ranchers and ranching and absentee landowners, and how those dynamics are different, because people are able to invest in ranch land, range land, pasture land. However, it has been much more difficult for that same investor to be able to raise cattle, right? Like, there's not this systematic approach. It's harder to hire
Mm-hmm.
for those people to do those jobs the right way, or the way you want it. There's not this, we don't have a co-op system that's able to apply your fertilizer and your chemical, and
Yeah.
you can buy all your inputs, and you can just do that with your cow herd.
Yeah.
So do you think that we will see that shift coming with either the system is built, or there are more outside investors, corporations, less family involvement coming into the cow herd sector?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if you could make a living doing that with 85% calf crop, then fine. You know what I mean? The cattle have to be cheap at that point for it to work, right? So, because if you build a land base, and if 85% calf crop was fine, you don't need to go tag calves. You don't need to check cows. You don't need to do any of that stuff. You just buy a piece, move them around, let them calve on their own. Not watch them. And I'm not saying that it's not possible to get a good mature cow herd to be way closer to 100% than 85%, but that involves a lot of good management in lots of other places too, right? A really strong, good heifer development program where you get them on the right track, bred the right way, selected for the right genetics, maternal disposition, all that kind of stuff for 2 years, and do it. If you did that, you probably could turn your mature cow herd out and, 4-year-old plus, and just let it completely do it on their own and not have a disaster. I would say that you're going to have a lot harder time buying groups that somebody else has developed and gone through, and not know the issues and the problems, and is turning them out and saying, okay, go calve in May and June, and we're going to be just fine, right? So I'm not saying that it's not possible to get cows that self-sufficient, but it does involve a process of working to get there. They're not just bought off the shelf at any random sale barn because they're this age and they're going to be fine. You're going to inherit a lot of issues if you try to scale that. So anyway, the point is and at that point, you have to have a system to prepare for what you want, which is labor intensive, to get to where you have basically an extensive cow herd to run it like an Australian cow herd. The biggest problem is that the labor fluctuates. It's not about the amount of labor, it's the fluctuation of labor. It's about how do you build when you have a disaster, when you have a fire, when you have a blizzard, when you have, cattle get out, when you have processing day, branding, whatever it may be. The ranching system is built upon your ability to trade in on the goodwill that you've given towards your neighbors, towards making those big catastrophic events possible. And if you approach it in a corporate manner, you can't rely on that. So then you have to overstaff to be able to be self-sufficient, which means that you're no longer efficient from a labor standpoint. Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense.
And so you're paid to be on call a lot of times, and then when you need to be there, you need to be there. And then every year or two, or a couple times a year, or whatever the interval is, you're going to have something comes up that has a labor need that is way beyond what you're staffed for. And how do you address that? So generally address that by neighborly goodwill and sharing
Man, I've
resources.
I've never thought of that. Yeah, neighborly or family goodwill.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I mean, it
It,
goes. Yeah,
a lot of guys will
there's
say, "Hey, we allow people to go snow goose hunting, deer hunting, pheasant hunting, whatever. But we want you to come back, and this is gonna be farming or ranching. We want you to come back when we're weaning time or whatever, because we need extra help hauling things around. We want you to come back when we're
Yep.
processing or branding, or we want you to come back and run the grain cart for a week. You know, you can come hunt pheasants, but we want you to, work 3 or 4, 5, 6 days. Like you can achieve that in a lot of different ways, but the corporate need for that isn't easily solvable.
No, I, unless you put more hired labor to it, like you said, or you can flex from some other system or something like that, where you've
Yeah,
got a labor surge and
yeah.
can
So
position people.
and it's low return anyway. I think back to podcast number 2 with Luke Perman, and we just like maybe our expectation that the cattle business is ever gonna achieve a rate of return that would be acceptable by any investment standards is a joke, right? Maybe it's just a
Huh.
long-term break-even business that is highly associated with an extremely profitable enterprise of long-term land ownership.
Hmm.
Right? I mean, that's what we kind of came up with on that one. It's like, hey,
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe that's what this business is.
Not so much right now.
Well, I mean, like it is, but if you're buying and selling, right? So
Yeah. That's
your inventory went way up, but just prepared, at some point for that to maybe go down or not go up again, not go up as much. So it's deceiving on years like this because it looks great because your balance sheet went up and what you're selling is good. But if you're in a situation where you're buying and selling, right? If you're running a yearling program, you're not going to have that great of a year. You did last year if you didn't hedge much, But a lot of the price rise happened in this time frame between when you sold the yearlings from last year and when you bought the ones from this year, unless you bought it
right.
really early. So in that situation,
Or
it's
if you
like,
did
okay,
hedge, your margin calls are
yeah,
going to
if that
crush a
market
lot
went
of your
up
margin.
way up during the 5 months of the year, 6 months of the year that you didn't own anything, it didn't help you,
No, true.
not one bit, because you didn't have any equity, or, didn't have anything to increase. But
So
anyway, what else is going on this spring? I feel like we're getting deep into stuff.
that was great. I don't know. It
I didn't
was
think we
a
were going
great
to get deep into
conversation
stuff today.
about.
I thought we were just going to talk about planting progress. I mean, we can, but yeah.
We
Uh,
did talk about planting progress, but we like talking about cows more.
yeah. But that's kind of I feel like the spring. Everybody's bopping around, getting all their small grain, getting their alfalfa in, doing all that kind of stuff. It's good.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's some nice plantings, some grass plantings this spring, some like cool season grass plantings that we could go on. That went into some low lying wet stuff that was really hard to get
Yeah.
to. It's great.
I thought that we probably saw more of that this year.
Yeah.
Those potholes are kind of dried out, and
Yeah.
they were dried out last fall too. So
Yeah.
great opportunity to get some things back in there. A lot of Garrison, creeping foxtail, some Timothy, reed canary stuff,
Yeah.
tall wheatgrass. Those mixes work quite well there.
Yeah.
But in your area, yeah, you see more saline issues with those low
Yeah.
areas as well. Kind of go hand in hand. So you need some grasses that are tolerant to the salts, but can take some flooding if it does happen to pond.
Yeah. My philosophy has changed a little bit with experimenting. I think that so like I'll use tall wheatgrass as an example. Tall wheatgrass is a tool.
Yeah,
It's not an asset. Okay, like I don't like it. Right. I don't like
yeah, poor quality.
it doesn't graze well. Like you can still see it standing where it's at. It makes hay. It makes coarse grinding hay, but it makes hay. It's extremely productive. And so I'm starting to like say, okay, how much saline restoration can we get done without having to use tall wheatgrass, right? Tall wheatgrass because it's cheap but largely unpalatable. Green wheatgrass, AC Saltlander more because of
Yep.
expense and stuff. So like, how far can we get with meadow brome, Timothy orchard grass, STF 43, tall forage fescue, like with those common grasses? And it's better than you think. It's better than you think. I think you can do a lot of good in moderate saline spots without having to go to the aggressive saline
Sure,
species.
sure. Yeah,
I don't know.
and I also think you might need to just look at that as a 5-year stand too, because
Yeah,
it's going to flood out at some point.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So I'm kind of getting to the point where if we're doing big seedings, kind of be like, okay, use this only where you have to, this
Yeah,
mix, and the rest of it you can go with some stuff that's not gonna that you're gonna like better. So
true. Hey, you remember when we made that game for Commodity Classic with
yeah,
the deck of cards and we had these
yeah,
scenarios and we're like, yeah, we should really do this on the podcast sometime?
yeah.
So Jared and I came up with a bunch of scenarios and we actually did print decks of cards. And so the goal is to give these out. And so we should probably start giving these to our podcast guests that we have too.
Yeah.
But I'm reading through some of these cards and there's one that hits with our discussion. All right, so the question goes like this. In an effort to increase beef supply availability for the growing carnivore diet trend, a promotional program gifts 25 bred heifers to any farmer that will take them, but must keep them for 1+ years to qualify. You cannot increase stocking rate you already have, and new pasture rent is unavailable. They cannot be dry lotted due to the rules of the program. How do you accommodate these heifers arriving in 60 days?
All right. Uh, so I've still got some fields to plant, and this is like one of those things too that we're not done with OptiGraze, you know. So like back to OptiGraze, we were talking about. So OptiGraze, you generally design it to be a full
Yeah.
season mix, right? And so like what I'll do a lot of times here is that since it's going in some of the lowest productivity ground, this year we can plant it early, but a lot of times it's kind of like, oh, what I didn't get planted or what's left over. So we'll flip
Mm-hmm.
that on its head and go to like what I just call warm season OptiGraze or custom Dakota Vision Egg OptiGraze, where we take almost all the Italian ryegrass out, we cut back on the oats just a little bit, but leave most of the oats in there, and then go in with BMR pearl millet or BMR sedan grass or sedan grass, something like that. Some warm seasons. So this is what we want to plant like the first part of May, which I'm good because I've got surplus rye coming. And to be honest with you, I am going to be stocking some pastures before I'm stocking some of this rye. Like
Really?
it's really behind, right? And so I think
Yeah.
some of it just barely germinated. It's spotty and it's coming, but I'm looking at it
Yep.
going, man, you're 3 weeks away. So I actually have the rye to go onto these, and the pastures are coming so good. We had so much growth from last year, so much left over that I think I can half stock the pastures before the 10th, 15th of May, right? Starting in a week or so, I can start getting stuff out there and onto stuff. So, interestingly, the rye doesn't have the head start this year like it normally does, versus the perennials. The perennials are actually coming after it because the rye was so late to germinate and so small to
Yeah.
start last fall. So I'm going to use something like OptiGraze, but I'm going to customize it because I can actually go to those pastures, go onto that rye with those, and then I don't really need to have a home for them until the 15th or 20th of June, right? So at that point, if I get my warm season OptiGraze planted here in May, I'll have a place to go to them with them for that. So, and I'm going to
Yep.
pick a small field, a small cutout field that is kind of a pain. One that was going to go to beans, which is not an exciting crop for me this year, and ideally would have water access to it, like an old
Yeah.
dugout or something else in there. Even if I didn't use that water all year, at least have something I could use it part of the year. And I would put it adjacent to existing pasture, ideally a cool season pasture. And this is one of the reasons we went to warm season OptiGraze, is because we were really looking for something to get cattle into July and August, while the brome grass pastures and the cool season grasses were resting to come back onto them. So what I'm targeting for a place to put my warm season OptiGraze, ideally, and it can work anywhere, is a small cutout, pain in the butt, so less than an 80, below average cropland, adjacent to an existing cool season pasture. Whether it has fence or not doesn't matter to me. I can put in a
No.
fence by that time, right? I got months to put in a good fence. Come June, I can go out there and put a 4-part fence up if I need to, or I can hot wire, whatever. So the fencing isn't that important to me, but that location, the type of ground is. So how do I take what was going to be a below average soybean yield and a below average yield environment on an expensive crop, turn that into a cheap crop that's going to extend my grazing season, and then just allow me to go back into corn next year without having to do that.
And it's okay. So I completely agree. I think the water source is the most important thing. And so even if you like, if it's not a dugout, if it's not a creek, um, above ground pipe, so
Hmm.
access to a hydrant or a well that you're able to run that and have some sort of portable tank system to move through these
Yeah.
paddocks is awesome. But if you've got 25 bred heifers, how many acres are you going to plant? How long do you think?
Uh,
You're starting a
go.
pasture, you're going to
Yeah.
this.
If I can keep them on rye till the 1st of June and don't go on till later, um, have a little bit of grass pasture to put with them. I mean, 30 acres.
Yeah.
If they're, it's a weird time to say bred heifer because you mean that they're going to calve. Let's say
Yeah.
fall calving
The
bred heifers, whatever. Like they're not, they don't have
replacement
calves,
heifers getting
right? So
bred.
I'm planning on them being kind of an open heifer for breeding. I'm planning on being an 800-pound heifer at this point. 30 acres is plenty.
I agree. Because there's some scenarios I've seen with folks running a pair per acre and getting nearly 100 days off of it on a mix like this.
Okay.
So, and this is like intensive rotating, every 3, 4 days, you're moving your hot wire, you're back fencing it,
Yeah.
it's on good ground, you fertilized it. But if you get that regrowth, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to get back to each paddock 3 times in the growing
Yeah.
season.
And so I sometimes we do that. I would say most of the time we don't. If we're doing something like this, we're going to plant a 35, 40, 50 acre chunk. Um, and then I'm like, okay, well, the water source is in the existing pasture, right? So several situations where that water source, let's say we have a 90 acre pasture next to a 35 acre piece of cropland that I want to use for a cover crop grazing mix for the summer. Plant the cover crop grazing mix. The water source is next to a gate in that pasture that I can hot wire out the rest of the pasture, but leave them still have 15 acres, right? So maybe I'm not able to, don't have the time, whatever, to do the daily rotation, to do the pipe, all that kind of stuff, right? If I'm not there yet, I can plant that, and then will those 15 acres get probably overgrazed in that situation, right? Yes, to some degree, 10 acres, whatever it is. But the other 75, 80 acres is going to get fully rested, right? Which
Yeah.
is going to be a way better management than continuous grazing, which was my other option. So even if I can't get that water source moved, right? No access to well water, don't want to haul, don't have time to haul, whatever it is. Depending on where that water source is, I can carve that out of the pasture and say, yep, it's still included, but I'm going to rest the rest of it. It'll work better than opening the gate, right? Which if you open the gate, they'll go out there every day, but then they're still going to come back in the evening and pick around at nighttime on that fresh regrowth grass that they've already
True.
been hitting hard and really not. They'll rest it better if you don't increase stocking rates than they would have prior, but it's really not truly a rest because they're constantly going to be picking apart at that.
Yep. I think the other thing to think about is that as like an insurance, an insurance place, if we get a 4-inch downpour rainfall event, you don't really want them on your cropland. Like
Yeah.
you're going to have a corner of a paddock that is demolished and doesn't
Yeah.
regrow if you keep them on that annual mix.
Yeah.
So allowing them to get back onto that pasture where you got some sod,
Yeah.
that's kind of important then too.
Yeah, run them out there and just. I mean, honestly, even if it's the morning after it happens, it'll be fine.
Yep.
It'll be better than
Yep.
if they were out there for the week after that happens.
Yep.
So it's not like you got to lock your cows back up every night in case it rains.
Yeah, and as far as species goes, I think these warm season mixes, the base needs to be like a pearl millet, sorghum sudan grass, a C4 grass that has great tillering and regrowth capabilities. And then if you can add in other species that regrow well with brassicas, maybe a legume or two. I'm not sure they always give you the best forage production,
Yeah.
but they certainly add some protein, some palatability, some biodiversity.
Yeah. Nice.
That's kind of the what the mix composition looks like.
Yeah. That'd be my plan. I'd love to get $100,000 worth of bred heifers for free. That'd be great.
How many bred heifers is that right now?
Yeah.
$100,000 divided by
They're not quite 4,000, but they get up to
500.
48. My brother told me 48.25 was the top load of pairs in Fort Pierre last week.
Yeah.
48.25 a pair.
Selling bred cows in January looks like a dumb decision now.
Well, you never know.
Yeah, I know.
It was the dumbest decision in 2025. If you would have sold them in December of 2024, it would have been the smartest decision in 2024. So
Right. There you go.
look at it that way.
Yeah.
You never know.
Yep.
So, well, we hope everybody's having a good spring out there. And if you got questions for us or scenarios that you want to go through, give us a call. Email us. Contact us at Roots and Ruminants.
We have that website, rootsandruminants.com. And the email is just that too, rootsandruminants@gmail.com. We like having conversations like these, so send us those thought-provoking ideas, and we'll have the discussions here. And we appreciate you listening. So happy spring, everybody.
Happy spring. Talk
See
to
ya.
you.
Well, we hope you enjoyed another episode of the Roots and Ruminants podcast. Let us know what you thought of it. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all those social media things. And, if you ever have any questions, just give us a call. We've got a toll-free number here at 888-498-7333. Be glad to hear from you. Thank you.